What's up, YouTube? What's up, FishTankTV.com? Today, I'm doing my introduction to the Walstad Method, okay? All has to do with this book, okay? Ecology of the Planted Tank, Aquarium by Diana Walstad, okay? So, I have a lot of people who do dirt and stuff, and they're wondering what I do and what the Walstad Method is. So I thought I'd do a series of videos on the Walstad Method and talk a little bit more about it and explain what it is. So dirt in a tank by itself is not the Walstad Method. It's part of it, you know, it's part of keeping an aquarium in a healthy cycle, but it's a little bit more than that too. So I'm going to talk about it. And this one's going to be the first video as an introduction. We'll see how well we do. If you like it, give me a thumbs up, rate it, comment on it, what have you. I'll do more. There's a lot of different topics to talk about, plants, bacteria, everything that goes into it. It's kind of a science, so we're going to be dropping science. Right? It's all about RTFM. That's why I'm wearing the shirt, right? Read the fucking manual, right? Read the fucking manual. All right, so we'll talk about it, all right? All right. So I think everybody knows the basics on keeping an aquarium. Not really here to talk about the basics. But let me talk a little bit about what the Walstad Method is. So, like I said, it's based on the book Ecology of the Planted Aquarium by Diana Walstad. And what it is it's sort of a method, it's a way of keeping a tank, right, that creates kind of a balanced ecosystem, right, or a balanced aquarium where the plants and the fish, right, where their needs are kind of balanced out, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that, right? So the Walstad Method really focuses heavy on growing plants in your aquarium to help minimize the kind of typical aquarium maintenance that you normally think of when you think of having a fish tank, right? So frequent water changes are typical maintenance. Dealing with algae blooms more frequently might be kind of thought of as typical. Definitely vacuuming gravel, stuff like that. All that stuff that you kind of think of, that you associate with an aquarium work-wise, is sort of what the Walstad Method looks to minimize, right? So it's often you'll hear it referred to as a low-tech tank, right? You're looking at moderate lighting, right? Moderate fish loads, everything to help keep the tank balanced, so that you don't have to go in and change things. Because the more you go in and change things with your fish tank, the more you run the risk of throwing it out of balance, and the more you run the risk of having something happen. It could be cloudy water, it could be an algae bloom, it could be a bunch of different stuff, right? So the less you mess with your tank, the better off she is usually, right? So sort of that concept has been coined, the term low-tech tank, or El Natural, I think is another term for it. And sort of what's kind of typical to a low-tech tank. Obviously, high-tech tank is the extreme opposite. Is the people who do water changes all the time. They have really high lighting. They do CO2 injection, all that stuff. That's typically considered high-tech. Nothing wrong with that. It's just a different way of keeping an aquarium. Okay. So low-tech tanks kind of have a small to moderate number of fish, right? The filtration is reduced, right? I personally have a very small quick filter attachment on my power head, and that's it. Lots of growing plants. As you can see, we've got lots of growing plants there, which help enable diverse microorganisms. So there's a lot of area for bacteria to attach to and work. Soil bacteria attached to the plants and fixtures, things of that nature, all leading to a kind of a healthy area for the fish. Moderate lighting. My lighting is just a hair under 2 watts per gallon, so 1.9 watts per gallon. It's a 55-gallon tank. Obviously I have to choose plants that work well in moderate lighting. I can't grow just anything. The Walstad Method's not a cure for, growing a high plant that has, huge demands in terms of light and that. So, but basically the low-tech, we're just looking to maximize just the natural processes that take place. It's just meant to make it easier and cheaper, really, to maintain than a typical high-tech aquarium, right? I mean, plants do a lot of the filtration, right? So bacteria in fish, right? Not CO2 injection, create the CO2 for this tank, right? It's all about how the bacteria break down in their cycles. CO2 is a byproduct of some of the bacterial cycles in the water, respiration, things of that nature, all create enough CO2 to sustain the ecosystem. So it's really about focusing on an ecosystem. Plants, not mechanical filters, help remove the ammonia and protect the fish, right? And fish food and the soil are what produce the fertilizers or offer the fertilizers to the plant and provide the elements that the plants need, right? So all the fish food, as it breaks down, seeps down into the soil table. Plants then can again use that as the nutrients to grow. So there's always an opportunity to feed your fish just a little bit more than somebody in a high-tech aquarium might feed their fish, because that excess is actually cycled through, and it's done really well because we've got so many plants growing in the aquarium. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on. Like I said, so I think if you're not familiar with it, we've got 1 inch of dirt capped by 1 inch of gravel here. And the dirt is what's supplying the plants with all the nutrients that it needs through the roots to grow healthy, grow strong. Then we've got filtration, and you really might not be able to see it, but I've got my power head here behind this log, and that power head has a pre-filter attachment. Take a look at that. You can see it from the side. I have a pre-filter attachment, and inside the tube that pre-filter sits in is some filter floss, and that's mainly just to polish the water, and that's it. That's the only filtration I run, if I run it at all, on this tank. And I tend to run just the pre-filter just to make sure everything's okay and that nothing gets sucked up into the power head. But I don't run any bio balls. I definitely don't run any charcoal filtration or anything of that nature. We'll get a little bit more into that, why it strips out the dissolved organic carbon, which is really good for the plants and is also another point of CO2. But that's really it. I mean, I have a light, I have a power head, and that's it. I have everything on timers so that I don't have to mess with timing, but this is it. I do water changes. I can do them once every 2 weeks. When the tank is new, and we'll talk about that a little bit too, this is just an intro, you want to do water changes more often, but as the tank matures, there's always the opportunity to go, according to Diana Walstad, you can go 3-6 months without changing the water because the plants are purifying the water, right? Okay, so before I get all hot and heavy into all the coolness of science that the Walstad book talks about, I wanted to go over some basic terminology. And the whole reason why I'm doing this is I've also had a lot of people talk about how they've gotten the book and they've read it, and man, it's a heavy read. It really is. I must have read this book about 2 or 3 times before it started sinking in and making sense. And I like to think I'm sort of smart, so it's just a pretty heavy book. It feels like a science book, but what I'll do is I'll talk about some of the basic terminology I'm going to talk about and use in the rest of the videos, and this way we all kind of understand where we're coming from. So we'll talk about pH, right? So pH is potential of hydrogen, right? In case you care what pH stood for, that's what it stands for. So we use what's called a pH scale to measure how acidic or base a certain element is, right? In this terms, liquid water. So pH focuses on concentrations of hydrogen or hydroxide, right? Depending on whether it's acid or base. So acid, right? You don't know what acid means, right? Acid is a solution that has excessive hydrogen ions. Woohoo! Yeah, that means what? All right, so basically acid is like a lemon, right? If you licked a lemon, that's acidic, right? It's really sharp and sour, okay? Base, think of base as like dull. It's like milk compared to lemons, right? Milk is kind of a base liquid in and of itself. The other thing we talk about a lot is CO2 or carbon dioxide, right? For the purposes of keeping aquariums, because carbon dioxide is a whole different story, right? It's about CO2 and the role it plays in the aquarium. So we're talking about CO2 that helps promote plant growth, because plants use CO2 as part of their photosynthetic process to create their own food. Basically, photosynthesis uses the carbon, right, that is in carbon dioxide. It also happens to be in DOC, or dissolved organic carbon, which is part of the organic matter that's breaking down in the tank, right? So plants can actually attain some of their carbon from that organic matter, which is why I don't run carbon filtration, because carbon filtration actually strips the dissolved organic content out, or dissolved organic carbon out of the water. So it kind of leaves you with one less opportunity for the plants to get their carbon. And then, of course, there's ammonia, right? Dreaded ammonia, which is a compound that really, really screws with your fish. It's basically like a poison to fish. It'll burn their gills. It's I'm not going to get into the scientific aspects of ammonia, but we all know that it's basically a byproduct of all the organic matter that's breaking down in the tank. And if there's nothing to take out the ammonia in the water, be it your filters, if you're running filters now, or your plants, if you've got a heavily planted tank, then the ammonia is going to build up, and your fish are going to suffer the consequences for it. So that's basically the terminology that I'll use going forward. Really not going to talk about any really heavy scientific stuff. It's about as scientific as it gets. But the other thing I just want to talk about was, again, I'm not telling you that Walstad Method is the only way to keep an aquarium, and there are lots of aquarium methods out there that work well depending on what kind of fish you've got, what kind of tank you want to have. If you want to have a bare bottom tank and you think that's the way to go, there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, again, I do very little with this tank. I don't put any fertilizers in. I don't dose any CO2 or anything like that. My plants grow really, really well. I'm very happy with their growth. I think if you look back at my latest video before this one, and you look at that Ludwigia that I've got here, this repens was probably down here, and that was only maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So it's growing really well. I don't have to rush it. It's going to grow on its own. The fish are really happy. Sometimes I get tired of testing the water because it's always 0 ammonia, 0 nitrate, 0 nitrite, right? And my pH is solid because I've got a good balance of coral rock in here, because I happen to have hard water and wood. So my pH is really stable. The other thing you might want to note too is the Walstad Method. Well, it doesn't really say it. I think there are some parts in there where it kind of alludes to the fact that you kind of want to embrace your tap water, right? If you can build an aquarium around what you get out of the tap, it's going to be usually a little bit more stable than if you're going for sort of advanced concepts, like if you're keeping discus and you need really soft water and you've got to go through an RO process and all that, which, that's cool if you want to keep discus and take on the extra work. That's a great way to do it. But if you're just looking for a basic standalone aquarium to keep you happy and enjoy, then embrace your tap water if you can. And, you got to learn a little bit about that stuff anyway, because everybody's tap water is different. My tap water down here in Florida is hard, right? I have really hard water, which tends to be good, across the board for a lot of different reasons. Soft water, some people have soft water, so you have to adjust accordingly. Sometimes you can stabilize your pH by putting in some coral rock, if you can get that, or some calcium sand, things of that nature. But that's sort of the water chemistry you want to play with before you start adding fish anyway, to make sure that it's stable. So, all right, so that does it for kind of the intro. Hopefully you get a good feel for the Walstad Method, what the ideas are behind it. I'm going to go through, and my next video is going to be on the next section of the Walstad Method, right? So if you guys like the idea, right, and you want to know about it, then give me a thumbs up, rate me, tell me what you like, and then after this introduction, we'll go a little bit more into the plant aspect of the Walstad Method. I'm not going to talk about plants in particular, just any plants in particular, just plants in general, and then we'll go from there. So thanks. Let me know what you think. Bye.